checking a couple things here to make sure we're actually broadcasting. Alright, awesome. We are live. So, let's go ahead and get started. As soon as I find my mouse. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bob's Live, our weekly show right here on the internet. And of course, you can find us on Facebook and on YouTube. And we're streaming every Tuesday at 5 p.m. And well, this week, I have a little bit of a weedy show for you. We're going to get out in the weeds. I'm not lying, so I don't know if you've seen the title. But first, before we do that, let's head out to the greenhouse. So I have a little bit of a greenhouse update and also a construction update all rolled into one. So if you've been following Bob's Live, over about the last 6 months, we have been building our largest expansion to date. It's almost 150,000 square feet of new greenhouse. And this morning, I traveled up there and got some video from inside the greenhouse and a little bit of what's going on outside. So if you live in the Mason area and you've driven by, you will have noticed quite a bit of change to the front of the new greenhouse up there, as we finish kind of the loading dock area and start to get ready to ship stuff in and ship stuff out. So, well, let's take a look at that. This morning I'm here at our new uptown greenhouse where after the last time we were here, it is now completely full of plants. So yeah, we just built this space. In fact, it's not even complete, but we're already using pretty much every square inch of it. So let's take a look. Behind me are all pots of zinnias that are just getting their start. But these make a perfect midsummer addition to your flower garden, or with these beautiful decorator pots. They'll look great on your porch, or as a centerpiece on your patio table, or really any application. So here's the stick tag on these. It's Zesty Mix, and they really create a beautiful pop of color. And as I said, these take full sun, and they're kind of the perfect midsummer flower. Next to the zinnias, we have these square decorator pots, and the way they're planted is kind of interesting. So if we take a look at this one, in the back of it right here, it's got some coleus, so it's going to get kind of tall. And then we have these petunias, they're going to kind of spread out. And then here in the front, we've got some New Guinea impatiens. And this would make a great patio pot. But the nice thing about the way that it's planted is it has a definite back and front. So you really don't need to rotate it. A lot of times pots, if you have them setting on your porch and you don't rotate them, they'll get kind of lopsided. In this case, you can kind of use that to your advantage. With planting something like this that has a definite back and front. So again, here's another example of that same concept. We've got a tall canna lily in the back, the petunias kind of in the middle, and then in the front we have portulaca that'll kind of trail down over the front of it. So it's kind of the thriller, filler, spiller concept, which I think is really ingenious to have something that's pre-planted like this. And there you can see those are already spilling over. Out here we have a mix of a little bit of everything. So here we have some beautiful Calibrachoa hanging baskets, and right next to it we have peppers. So somebody the other day called in and was asking if we had peppers available yet. Well, it's still a little bit too cold for peppers here in the Ohio Valley, but we do have them transplanted and started. So that's what's happening out in the greenhouse right now. And see, Patty says that portulaca was her mom's favorite. Portulaca, it's one of those sort of classic heirloom plants, sort of like Dusty Miller and some of those types of plants that are starting to see a resurgence in popularity. So we're seeing the same trend with houseplants inside, but then there's also a lot of these varieties like portulaca, or some people call it desert moss or desert rose. But a lot of these quote unquote older plants are really starting to make a comeback. And yeah, it's nice to see, because portulaca, it is an awesome plant, because it's almost a succulent in that it can really retain moisture in its leaves. It has kind of those thick, fleshy leaves, and it makes it really well suited for containers and areas where it might dry out a little bit during the summer. So yeah, she's saying that she grew them at her home in the 60s. So yeah, again, it's one of those classic plants that's making a comeback. And this week, I want to talk about a really classic plant. So we're going to kind of go back all the way to the first settlers coming to the colonies. And really, even back before that, to ancient Greece, the Romans, the Egyptians, and the Chinese. And what we're going to be taking a look at is the one plant that we all know and maybe love, maybe hate, and that is dandelions. So, dandelions, we have them all over the place around here, and I think most people struggle with them in their yards, and most people consider them a weed. But for most of human history, dandelions were not considered a weed. In Japan, and also in colonial, sort of that era, 16, 1700s in England, they were considered an ornamental plant, and they were commonly featured in gardens. But prior to that, they were known as a medicinal plant. And dandelions, of course, they were brought to the U.S. by settlers. And you know how they reproduce with their nice, poofy fluff balls. With having an aerial seed dispersion method like that and no natural predators here in the US for them, they kind of took off and have now sort of become an invasive species. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. My head's sort of cut off there. But for most of history, dandelions were considered a medicinal plant. And here we can see kind of an old horticultural or taxonomical painting of dandelions. And dandelions, they're a weed, yeah, but they are seeing a resurgence as a medicinal plant. And probably the simplest thing, and it's something that dates back well into the past, but it was most recently sort of uh, used during, the Great Depression, and then during both world wars, really, when food was kind of scarce, and that is the classic dandelion salad. Um, you can go out and pick the leaves when they're young, and dandelions, their leaves can be used as a salad green. And it's kind of interesting. Whoa, let me find my mouse here. Um, doo, doo, doo. Dandelions, they were kept on ships, so they would dry them out and use them on ships because they are just packed full of vitamins. And they use them to stave off scurvy. So, of course, kind of the big plant that you think of when it comes to scurvy is oranges and lemons and citrus fruits because of the vitamin C. Another plant that's extremely high in vitamin C is dandelions. So they have more vitamin A than spinach, more vitamin C than tomatoes, and they also have tons of iron and calcium and potassium. So they are just really rich in nutrients. So, you've got the dandelion salad. Another use is as a fried green. So this is actually a Lebanese dish, and it is called, I had to write it down here, it's called hinba. And hopefully I'm not butchering the pronunciation. But here they are fried up with some onions. And, it's just another way to eat them. But literally every single part of a dandelion is edible. And something that I do is I make, and you can buy this, we actually have it at our local Walmart, which I was surprised to see it sitting on the shelf in the herbal tea section. But one of the uses of roasted dandelion root is dandelion coffee. And it is an interesting drink because you can brew it up. It makes one little sachet of roasted dandelion root in a teacup. It gets, in about 3 minutes of steeping, it gets just as dark as a cup of coffee. But it has a really interesting flavor. It's not as strong or as bitter as coffee. It's a lot smoother. And what I like to do is I'll take the roasted dandelion root and I'll also brew up dandelion tea. So another use for the blooms themselves is to make a tea out of them. And I'm sure to the neighbors I look like a total nutcase out in my backyard picking dandelion blooms, but that's what I'm doing. I'm taking them inside, putting them in my teapot, adding some boiling water, letting it steep for about 3 minutes, and you get a beautiful dandelion tea. And what I'll do is I'll add the roasted dandelion root in with it and kind of make a 2-in-1 concoction. So, for me, I have allergies, and the benefit for me is with the dandelion tea where I'm using the blooms. I'm ingesting some of that pollen, and that's supposed to help with your allergies. So I'm giving that a try and seeing if that helps. For a while, I took bee pollen pills, and yeah, it seemed to help alleviate a lot of my allergy symptoms. Of course, I still use traditional medicine like Zyrtec, um, but I'll do anything to help with my springtime allergies. And of course, I couldn't talk about dandelions without talking about the classic dandelion wine. So, yeah, that's a thing. You can research that on your own. But dandelions, they are more or less, even though they've been here for 300-400 years at this point on this continent, they are an invasive species. So, this is from a recent article. This was an image that I was looking at from a recent article talking about the resurgence of dandelions in Ohio. And for farm fields, it can be a problem because it makes the ground harder to till. And also, dandelions, they tend to come out early in the springtime, and it can smother seedling growth. And something that's interesting about dandelions, I think we've all noticed that they can survive pretty much anywhere. You can have a flower in your flower bed, and it's like, oh, I'm not getting enough water. I think I'm going to die. Meanwhile, there's a dandelion growing right next to it in a crack in your sidewalk. And it's like, yay, concrete. But yeah, dandelions, they can survive pretty much anywhere. They're also resistant to a lot of herbicides. And it's a resistance that they've built up over time. So it's sort of an arms race. They'll come out with a better herbicide, then dandelions over time get resistant and catch up. And that's what we're seeing right now in Ohio. They've sort of reached that point where herbicides aren't really working anymore to curb the dandelion growth. But on the flip side, dandelions do have super deep tap roots, and they pull a lot of nutrients from deep down in the soil. So that iron, that calcium, that potassium, they're sucking up from the deeper soil levels. So, it's sort of a double-edged sword, I guess. And for me, if I see dandelions out in my yard, I'm not going to sweat it. They're out there, and for me, to jump back, we'll skip the wine, but, for these reasons, I can live with dandelions. I mean, if anything, they're a little free-growing snack out in my yard. But yeah, I thought, let me jump over here to the webpage. So yeah, this is the article, and if you just search for dandelions making a comeback in Ohio, this article was just published March 24th, and it's from the College of Food and Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Ohio State University. So, yeah, it's an interesting read. And it talks about herbicide resistance. And, yeah, if you have time, check out that article. Let me jump back here. And the last thing that I have is, of course, the Dandelion King. Because dandelions, they are the king of the weeds, I guess you could say. But are they really a weed? I mean, that's up for debate. Um, I thought I would jump over to a microscope view, and we did this last week with kind of some mild success. But I thought we'd take a look at a dandelion underneath of a microscope. And I was talking about making dandelion tea and sort of my reasons for doing it. So let me zoom in here. And you can actually see the pollen stuck on this dandelion. Take it down just a hair more. There we go. So the little curlicues there, those are the pistils. So that's what the pollen sticks to. And each one of those little pistils, a single pollen grain will travel down through there, down to a single ovum, and fertilize it. And what you end up getting is this, the little puff ball. So each one of those basically goes to a single seed. And that little bit there is what makes the little fuzzy bit on the end of a dandelion seed. But you can see it there just absolutely covered in pollen. So whenever I make dandelion tea, I'm getting a lot of that pollen into the water. And usually if you look at a dandelion, you usually can't see those pollen grains, but here through the microscope we can really see them stuck to it. There's a really good view of that one. Sort of right there, right next to me. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at. Something that I did when I was a kid, and I'm sure everybody's done it, was use the pollen from dandelions as some paint. So we would take the little dandelion blooms and kind of blot it on our skin and end up with little yellow patches on our skin. But that's what those yellow patches are, is the pollen from the dandelions. So another thing, let me grab this. And it's amazing, I went out and got these samples like literally about 10 minutes ago. And already they're getting kind of wilty. Of course, today here in the office, we didn't kick on the air conditioning, so it's about 11 billion degrees in here right now. So here we have a bud that hasn't opened yet. And something that I was going to do, let me grab my pocket knife here. We're going to do some, got my pocket knife, but we're going to do some redneck flower dissection. And hopefully this works. I didn't do a test beforehand because, hey, let's do it live. That makes it more fun. But if I cut this bud open, oh yeah, there we go. It might help if I use some little tweezers. Alright, that is perfect. So this how I was talking about how each pistil goes down to a single seed, you can really see that here. So up at the top of the screen, each one of those is what will become a seed. And then we can also see the little fuzzy bits there. And then up on top we have the petals, which are already turning yellow. So this bud, it was probably going to open up like in the next, I would say 24 to 48 hours. So we've seen that. Of course, we've seen the bloom. So I've got the bloom here. Let me get that little speck out of the way. This is another bloom, and we might be able to see a little bit more. I've kind of got it upside down here. It's always hard to remember which way this camera is oriented. And I need to figure out a better position when I use my microscope, because it is all the way off to the side. But this bloom, it's a little bit further along in its life cycle. So we can see there's not as much pollen stuck to it. And also with this one, I left the stem attached, and oh, it's of course a really hard stem to break. This is going to be a balancing act here. I can already tell. Well, I was wanting to get, this is the end of the stem right here. And something that's interesting about dandelions is that they are a latex producer. So it's kind of hard to see there, but you can see the white milky sap coming out of it. So probably the last time that we saw sap like this, or seen sap like this, in an episode of Bob's Live, was back at Christmas time when we were talking about poinsettias. So poinsettias are another plant that produces that white milky sap, and it's high in latex. And that's what gives dandelions and a lot of plants with that type of sap a bitter taste, is that latex in the sap. So another plant that does this is your lettuces and to some extent your cabbages. So your brassica type plants, whenever they bolt, they start to produce latex in their sap. So leaf lettuce, right now, where the weather's nice and cool, it's not producing latex. But once it gets warm outside and the plant goes, oh, it's time to reproduce, and it produces that shoot with flowers on it, it'll start producing latex in the sap, and that's when your leaf lettuce turns bitter. So you get the same thing here with dandelions. Now, it is interesting with dandelions, if you taste them just raw, like try that sap, it's really bitter. But making something like dandelion tea where you're boiling it kind of breaks that down, so you don't really get that bitterness. It really helps kind of cut the bitterness. Another interesting thing, while we're talking about latex, is it is latex. What we use to make latex rubber. So there's actually companies that are researching growing dandelions as a field crop to harvest for their latex. So in the future, we might have latex products that are made out of dandelion sap, essentially. Okay, so we've seen a bud, we've seen the flower. Now let's take a look at the seed pod. And this is, to me, this is the most interesting to look at under a microscope. Because when you focus on it, it is just beautiful. You get all of those little whiskery hairs, and that is just so interesting to look at. Oh, if I can keep it in focus. So let's pull out one individual seed to look at. This is going to be hard. So I've got a little pair of tweezers here. These tweezers are actually for electronics work, but oh well. I'm trying to grab one, but oh. Okay, I'm getting the fuzzies all over me. Let me just grab a bunch and then tease one out from that. Alrighty, there is a good one. I'm making a mess here in my office. Ooh, now we gotta find it. Alright, so there is the seed. And we can zoom in a lot more. So let's take it all the way down. Here is our seed, and I'm getting a lot of reflection. There we go. I had to kill the light, and that kind of corrected the color on it. The reflective background on this microscope, it works good for some things and terrible for others. But here we can see a seed close up. So it's a rod-shaped seed. Similar to the shape of like a marigold seed. Oh dear. I need to make a tool for the microscope. Paper clips always come in handy. So there we go. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it. Oh, that is a really clear picture right there. So yeah, it's a rod-shaped seed, and you can kind of see the top of the stem there. And In a single dandelion bloom, there are probably close to 100 seeds or so. I'm I've never actually counted how many there are in a dandelion. So if somebody is quick on the Google, you can check that out. Um, but yeah, that is part of why they're so invasive. Is one little bloom can produce a ton of dandelion seeds, and then they float off by air, and they can travel for miles and miles and miles before they land and find a nice home in a crack in a sidewalk and set up shop. Um, but yeah, something like this, it just gives me an appreciation for even something like the humble dandelion. I mean, it is. Whoa, okay. There we go. That's better. The dandelion, it's one of those plants that you pass almost daily. I mean, they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere. Um, it's a weed. So it is one of those things that to me is sort of one of those amazing things that's in plain sight that you can investigate and look at and just be amazed about because yeah, plants can be pretty cool when you kind of take them apart and look at them. So, well, that is all that I have for this week. And of course, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. And then we're also over on TikTok now at Bob's Market. So find us online. And this week on our blog, of course, I think you've already guessed it, going to be talking about dandelions. So check that out. And well, until next time, keep growing.